I'm here in Aldeburgh and Suffolk on the east coast of England on the edge of the North Sea. And this tower was built more than 200 years ago to stop an invasion by Napoleonic France. This is the history of the Martello Towers. And more importantly, that age-old debate between direct coastal defense and faith in the wooden walls of naval power.
Heavy cannons atop this brick-and-mortar fortress could fire out at any ship approaching the harbor here. 24 men inside had all the ammunition, supplies, and water they needed to withstand any approaching foe. But not a shot was fired from one of these, at least not at the French. Coastal defenses are a centuries-old concept, but this particular idea of a small, castle-like tower with a few cannon and a small garrison was taken from the experiences of the Royal Navy when Britain invaded Corsica in 1794. This was to support Corsican separatists opposed to French Republican rule and to secure the British foothold in the Ligurian Sea and the entire western Mediterranean. Corsicans had built watchtowers, or torreggiani, for centuries. Under the Genoese, more complex towers were erected to defend the coastline, using the design of military engineer Il Fratino, or El Fratin. There were 3 stories, guns atop, and no entrance save for a single door accessed by a removable ladder. In 1794, this tower came under 2 days' heavy bombardment and an assault from the land. It eventually surrendered, but it took a 74-gun ship of the line, a 32-gun frigate, and a sizable landward force significant effort, and yet inside were only 33 men, 3 of whom died. Suffice it to say, the tower acted as what we might call today a force multiplier, allowing a small force to act as a more formidable defense, and more importantly, a significant delay to any attacking force, buying time to react to an attack on the coast at any one point. Now, the British took, held, and used the tower, but when they were forced to withdraw from Corsica in 1796, for good measure, they made sure to blow it up completely before they left. And here's the Torre di Mortella today. Impressed by this tower at Mortella, the British soon came up with a similar design, with an iconically British, slightly mispronounced name: the Martello Tower. There already existed some coastal forts and batteries in Britain and Ireland, but most were centered around important ports and inlets. Miles of coastline lay open and unprotected. When these forts were initially constructed at the turn of the 19th century, Britain and Ireland were under direct threat of invasion. Indeed, in 1797, French troops landed at Fishguard in Wales, and in 1798 in County Mayo in Ireland as part of the wider Rising of United Irishmen. Both were quickly dispatched by British troops, but the threat of invasion remained imminent and would grow more significant. By 1803, Napoleon was assembling his Army of England with the intended purpose of crossing the Channel and capturing London. In fact, the first stones of a great victory column to commemorate the successful invasion of England were laid in 1804, but the Corsican ogre was one to count his eggs before they were in the pudding, and it eventually had to be changed to commemorate the presentation of the first Légion d'honneur. Napoleon said he needed to be master of the English Channel for but 6 hours. The Royal Navy would of course endeavour to prevent any such thing, but the threat was still there. British naval supremacy and fleet actions was becoming the standard, but the French and Dutch still had ships, and the fleet couldn't be everywhere at once. Napoleon's plan was to have small boats and barges, some designed to carry 100 men and a single cannon, to swiftly cross the English Channel. Great effort was poured into assembling this fleet and the army. Indeed, at home, many Britons feared the French were up to all sorts of schemes, from giant ships to giant balloons to a tunnel under the Channel. And this brought to the forefront one of the oldest debates in British history, as to whether time and resources should be spent on coastal defenses, or more proactive action with the Navy. As Themistocles spoke of the wooden walls being the salvation of Athens, many felt that increasing the naval budget was the only true defense for an island nation, whilst many wanted more money for local militias and defensive fortifications to be built all around the coast. This debate was just as apparent as it was at the time of the Armada, throughout the 18th century, through the many war scares of the 19th century, through both world wars and indeed today. It was finally agreed that these towers would plug the major gaps between existing fortifications along the coast, where the French might land to march on London. They could not defend the entire coastline, but they could place these at regular intervals so they could sight and hinder any enemy landing. 103 towers would be built in England. The first line of towers was constructed in 1805 along the south coast, numbered 1 to 74, mostly concentrating in 3 potential landing areas, between Folkestone and Dungeness, along Winchelsea Beach, and between Rye and Eastbourne. These were about 33 feet high and 48 feet wide, and had a single 24-pounder cannon on a barbette, which could be traversed in any direction. The walls were up to 8 feet thick, with interior rooms usually located not in the center, but slightly towards the land, leaving the walls thicker on the sides facing the sea. Inside would be 2 accessible levels, with barracks for the men, officers' quarters, stores, powder magazine, and below an additional room for storage, and quite importantly, their own water supply. There would also usually be a kitchen, a common area, and of course an ample supply of accessible muskets. The brick and mortar would suitably defend them from any smoothbore black powder gun. Once rifling and then higher velocity propellants were introduced, forts would need to be completely redesigned. But for 1805, this was suitable for the purpose, and relatively cost-effective when compared to stonework. A second line of 29 towers, running up the east coast from Point Clear, Essex, to here, the entrance of the port of Slawden, next to Aldeburgh, was built 4 years later in 1809, while the war continued with France. These towers were slightly larger, and some versions had this quatrefoil design, allowing for one 24-pounder gun for longer range in the center, and 2 carronades or howitzers on either side for closer range targets. This design was perfect for this area, allowing to defend from a landing here towards Aldeburgh, and on this side, it defends this inlet along the River Alde at the port of Slawden, which is now no more, but at the time served as a bustling port in Suffolk. At the same time, a vast network of about 50 towers were constructed in Ireland. There were 29 built in 1804 and 5 around Dublin alone, and some constructed around Cove in Cork. 3 were built in Scotland, and at least 2 that I know of in Wales. And that's not even including those throughout the empire, from Canada to St. Helena, from Bermuda to India. And there are also martellos in the Channel Islands. Coastal fortifications are a way of life for the Channel Islands, and the history of their fortifications is extensive. They got their own series of martello towers during the Napoleonic Wars, as part of a series of fortifications built over the course of the war. Many of them are gone now, but some still survive, including the Tour de Vendée on Jersey, which now serves as a maritime day mark. Some of the towers have become parts of other fortifications, and some have been rather inelegantly modified. Look what the Jerrys did during their occupation in the Second World War. This particular style of martello tower was mostly used in Britain and Ireland, but towers like them, mostly British but also Dutch, Portuguese, Spanish, can be found all over the world. There are even a few American martello towers all along the Atlantic coast. Much of the defenses were reliant on local militia soldiers raised in the area, and for a time, between 1804 and 1810, many were manned by companies of sea fencibles, a sort of naval militia on both land and sea. The martello towers would never see action. The best we can say is they might have fired the occasional round at smugglers. But coastal defenses would continue to be built, notably with the larger and more advanced Palmerston forts of the 1850s and 60s. Now, we can't end a Martello Tower episode without talking about probably the most famous Martello Tower of them all, now the James Joyce Martello Tower. Originally built to defend Dunleary, Dublin's major port, it was repurposed as a home, and the author James Joyce stayed there for a few days in the 1920s, and later began his famous novel Ulysses there. It now houses the James Joyce Museum, and it's an important pilgrimage site for many today, and it will always be an iconic part of both Irish and literary history. Another Martello Tower near and dear to my heart is the one at Hythe, where the first school of musketry was established, to train the army in professional musketry when the rifle musket was first adopted in the 1850s, and which would serve as an important small arms training center until 1969, when the Small Arms School moved to Warminster. And here's me rifling through the collection at Warminster in 2021. I even got to see the original 24-pounder gun taken off the top of the Hythe Martello and moved here to Warminster. And a special thanks to then Captain, now Major Guerin of the Small Arms School Corps.
Now, a lot of these towers have been repurposed. Some of them were used as other fortifications in the Victorian era, some were turned into water towers. In the Second World War, a lot of these were fitted out with anti-aircraft guns. Since some of them have turned into museums, some of them have been turned into homes, some of them have been completely abandoned, and some of them can be rented out by eccentric historians, so that might be a future episode here. So that was the Aldra Martello Tower. I am Daryl, known in genteel circles as the Lord Rivers, and this is the Ministry for History.